All right. Joining us today, Spandau Ballet founder and solo artist, Gary Kemp. Gary, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm going through the probably the most nervous time of any album when you actually put it out into the world and people start to judge it and you talk about it and you know it's a very private thing writing songs and the first person who normally hits. So this is how it works in my house. So I've got a room with a grand piano in. I'm very lucky to have that. And there's chaos going on in my house, utter noise I've got 3 young boys and a dog, and my wife's trying to create some sort of universe out of that we're all going to remember and be happy with. And so occasionally I just go straight into that piano room and I'll sit there, and that's it. There's like putting some blinkers on. It's like just going into my own private place. And sometimes out of that comes a song, and then if I like it, I'll sing it loud. And so the first person is whether my wife can say, that's really good, I liked what you were doing there, how did you hear it above the hubbub? But that's.
Well, you initially stated, though, that you have nerves. You have more nerves now than you've ever had before. And is that because it's a solo album and it's a true reflection of yourself?
Yes, it is. Paradoxically, to make this album, I needed confidence. And I think that confidence came from playing with Nick Mason and fronting that band, singing more, playing more guitar, being embraced by the Pink Floyd fraternity. I say fraternity because it is mostly blokes. It's men who dig Pink Floyd. Because I do this Nick Mason Source Full of Secrets gig. And I think we're coming to Australia as well.
With them. I'll be there, man.
Touring with them for 2 years. And I think it was interesting because as much as I love it, my frustration is they're not my songs. But and there were 2 things that happened. So first of all, I get this confidence from them and embraced by them as a frontman and as a player. And I reached 60, and there's more life behind me than ahead of me. And I'm trying to work out how all of those versions of myself that get shown on TV, and I get to see a lot, and going all the way back even to being a fan of music, because there's a track on here called Waiting for the Band, which is a sort of hymn to being a fan. How all those versions become relevant and a part of my life now. Where does that sit? And I tried to, on this album, sort of embrace a lot of that and work my way through that. There's a track on here called I Am the Past, and the 2 lines are I am the past trying to be here. And I think that was kind of one area that I was writing in when I started making this record. It was about a guy of a certain age and looking back and some embracing a lot of it and taking a lot of that 70s music that I love and trying to put that in the mix as well sonically. And I suppose it was a kind of therapy as well for me.
You talk about you mentioned the song Waiting for the Band. You mentioned how this is written from you as a fan, from a fan perspective. However, there is the line in there, even though we're all estranged, I never really felt your change.
No, I never felt shortchanged.
Shortchanged. Got it. Okay. Now,
yeah,
but one can't help but to think that that's an ode to Spandau Ballet.
I suppose there's, when words are flying out, there's a lot of, there's subconscious truths coming out too. I think initially I was thinking, basically there's a song that begins about all the wonder of that dressing up, that falling in love with artists. Bowie was on my mind, and the tribalism of hanging out with kids who wanted to be Bowie and wanted to meet him. In the middle of the song, I go into Hammersmith Odeon. The music actually shifts gear, goes into the auditorium, and the euphoria of him coming on stage, and then it goes back to the reverie. And I wanted to say, like, we always keep that feeling. I've still got that yearning to be
in a band,
to be. No, to be a fan, to have the greatest thing happen to me, walk in front of me on stage and change my life and make me feel excited again. So, but also a kind of saying goodbye to all those kids and memories and ghosts that are still there in my life, that hung out around the back of stage doors, that ran up trying to get autographs. you know, even though we're all estranged, you know, I still cherish it, you know. And I actually then went and got some interviews with kids from outside Earl's Court in 1978, waiting to go in to see Bowie. And I found that online. And I took the interview pieces and I put them underneath some of the music. And they kind of bubbled up like ghosts and they gave me goosebumps. And I was really sort of trying to enshrine them forever in a piece of music that paid homage to their brilliance.
That is brilliant. There's a line I also have to ask in your lyrics in the song that you just brought up, I Am the Past. It's I'm a desperate chance you've taken too soon. That line, that particular line caught me as I was going through the record. Any sort of light on that?
I think that song has I've been with my wife for 20 years, but she's a lot younger than me. And I think, you know, I sort of, you know, I had a whole past that was very different before I met her. And sometimes in your insecurity, as all of us, as when we get older, there's a sense of loss about getting older. And I was just, it was a question to her, really. Sometimes, you know, I feel quite fractured by all the things that have gone on in my life, you know, whether it's divorces or whether it's, you know, court cases or tragedy, or like we all do. And how do I regain freshness on a day-to-day basis and positivity on a day-to-day basis? And, you know, and I think sometimes I'm turning around saying, you know, why me? Why choose me? You know, I got a lot of baggage. I can't try and keep it outside the door, but then I don't try and keep it outside the door. I drag it in and I write songs about it.
I mean, that's what artists do, right?
I think on this album, and because I'm writing for myself to sing, and I can't do this if I was writing for Tony, say, I'm writing stuff that, even if it's in the third person, has got stuff that I've experienced in it, and it might be blown up. There's a song on here called A Rumor of You, which is a kind of a slightly psychotic song about an obsession with a woman that you think, well, the guy has either been with her and lost her, and he's got a suspicion she wants him back, or maybe he's never met her. You know, maybe he thinks he's obsessed with her, right? But it is about obsession, and it's about unrequited obsession. And I think I can take elements of my experience in life that I've been through in relationships and embed that into that song. And so that was a song that I wrote on the road with Nick, and I wrote lyric first, completely lyric first. And a lot of this album was written lyric first. And I think that was what was showing me the way to it being a solo album I had to make about, because, you know, when I was writing for Spandau, I was always writing melody first.
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting, because some of the words are very observant, sort of reflective in a reminiscent type of way, and sort of, you know, themes about where you're at now. And it kind of reminded me of like what Lennon did with Double Fantasy way back in 1980, how he was saying, you know, I'm writing about me, you know, we've gone through these changes. The 60s, you know, didn't quite work, the flower power and all that stuff. And wasn't the 70s a drag? You know, let's make the 80s good. You know, that's what he said. And I guess you could probably relate, like, as a working class hero yourself, someone that's come from that sort of background, that's hit success in later life, and sort of able to sort of embody that in a record where you say, well, this is where I'm at now.
I think so. Whether or not that was, you know, I think I was trying to use those ideas. You know, there's also elements on here about, you know, like a track like In Solo, which is about the struggle of feeling important within a city, the paradox of feeling isolated, even though you're surrounded by millions of people. So I'm trying to get some difficult ideas, but deliver them with stealth through hooks and commercial, some sort of performance that it, you know, I don't want it to, you know, I didn't want this to be an acoustic album that was just gently sort of like trying to express my pain, you know. So, you know, I'm into hooks, I'm into big melodies, I'm into drama, you know, certain writers like Todd Rundgren really appeal to me. I love what Steely Dan do, and I, I think, and even Floyd to a certain extent. So I'm trying to get all of that, deliver some tough stuff to other people. And I think that's okay, because what I've experienced is universal. So it's not going to be so personal. The thing is about Lennon is he would make it very particular about him and Paul at times, and his own story, him and Yoko, it was very, very particular. And I think sometimes what you got to do is try and make it more universal.
That's a good point. You actually, I'm gonna change things up a bit for a second. Gary, I need to know this. You can go on tour tomorrow with Spandau Ballet and sell stadiums across the country, across the world. Why, at this point in your career, focus on a solo career?
Well, I mean, Spandau is over for me now, and I think it's we've had too many sort of comebacks and trying to get back together, and in the end, what I think we've all realized is we ain't those guys anymore. As individual, when you're in Britain is very good at forming bands as opposed to solo artists. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was all about bands because it was mostly working class kids, and it was a gang. They feel strength in a gang. A gang is louder than an individual, and then they get up on stage, and that's the band. Well, we were a gang back in the 80s, and we tried to be a gang a few times since, but we're not anymore. There's too many, there's too much of a, we find it difficult when we're together as people. And so there's no point just pretending commercially to do that. So I think, I've enjoyed other stuff in my life, whether it's acting or whether it's doing music on my own or whether it's working with Nick Mason. And it became a relief to think I'm not writing songs. I don't have to write songs and put them aside and think, oh, when Spandau Ballet get back together, I'll use that. I just want to do different things now. I don't need the stress of trying to get that old gang back together again and having to deal with all the, the bitterness and stuff. You know what it's like, right? That's what it's like.
I think it's pretty interesting to hear like a songwriter actually sing his own material, as opposed to, there's always that sort of tension when you've got someone else who's got a great voice singing work that you're proud of. But I heard a live performance, an acoustic performance of True and Gold on one of your interviews, and it was special because you were the guy that wrote those songs. And it kind of reminded me of Burt Bacharach when he's the typical songwriter that lends his work out. But I've got this album where he actually sings some of his own songs, and it's just, I don't know, there's something about when
Jimmy Webb is another
own work.
Jimmy Webb is another person. I went to see Jimmy Webb live, and he's singing songs that we've only ever heard big crooners sing, and he hasn't got the same chops vocally, but the stories are his.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's coming from the horse's mouth, so to speak. It's like Dylan. I think I actually got into Bob Dylan by listening to covers that I really liked. And then I was able to appreciate Bob Dylan, and then now I like Bob Dylan. It's
well,
the other way
it's
around.
true. I mean, Bob started off as a songwriter for other people. I mean, his biggest hit, Tambourine Man was someone else's.
Birds and
But I know what you're saying. But I think I didn't know how much the people would want to even listen to what I do. So, but I just felt that if I've got to make an album for myself. It's not about, I know that I would probably chart it more if I gave it to Spandau, but this isn't a bunch of songs that I can imagine Spandau ever doing. And I just wanted to be able to do that and experience it and see if it worked.
Gary, in 2017, when you were on Good Morning Britain, you had mentioned that you were in the studio recording music for Spandau. Are these those tracks?
No. 2017. So we must have got back together then. Oh, did we?
So these tracks were fully meant to be solo from the very beginning.
Oh yeah. These were all for me, and they only started in 2019 is when I started writing these songs. The oldest song on here actually is called "The Feet of Mercury," and it's a song that I wrote 15 years ago. and it's just been it was the only thing that's kind of been sitting there, and I've enjoyed the lyrics of, and I just thought, I really want to put that into the album because I think it would work. But everything else was written. In Solo was the first song I wrote for this album. It came out of just sitting at the piano. There was a tale I wanted to tell, and it actually, there's part of it was inspired by Paul McCartney's Another Day. I really love the mundane, small idea of beginning a song with a woman getting ready to go to work. And I've always felt for her. Ever since I was a kid and I first heard that song, I've always felt for her story. I think she reminded me of my mum. My mum went out. We had no money growing up, but my mum, would get out and go to work. My dad would go to work. They'd take us to school. And I felt connected to this woman in Another Day. And I think I wanted to write this person again. And so the beginning of In Solo begins with her with a woman going to work in a big city, but feeling very alone at the same time. And then out of that came a guy, the second person. Oh, wow, there's a guy. Yeah, he's the same. He's trying to get turned on by social media. He's looking for likes, but he's not getting it. and then I didn't know. And then I put it in first person singular. And I think sometimes I jump around like that in a song because the first person can often be me going inside the character's head and singing.
So you're talking about characters and third persons. You reckon this is the actor coming out in you, or the producer maybe?
I think
the work is very sort of cinematic as well. I find it would transfer onto film quite nicely.
Well, when I think about putting the track together, and I work with Toby Chapman on this, I do think very cinematically. And that song very much was down on, the cameras were down with these people cutting between the two of them. And then there's a middle section when the guitar solo comes in, and there's this, what I call a Greek chorus, and it's a judgment, an objective view. And that's the camera really high up. And then it goes down into the synthesized moments, which is inside their heads.
You've got to put videos to these tracks.
Oh, you know what? You if you can give me the budget, I'd
There's a song on your album that really took me the most. It really resonated with me. It's called Our Light, and it's the last track. It's almost like you were, for me anyway, you were saving the best for last. And it's just a perfectly produced and performed. Even your voice just comes straight through the record on that song. It's perfect.
It
reminds me of Stevie Wonder's As.
Wow.
It took me back to the 70s.
Well, the 70s have been a really big thing on this album for me. I was going at, I mean, the synth solo on that, I wanted it to sound like
Rick Wakeman.
Rick Wright, actually.
Oh man, it was like Rick Wakeman came and hijacked the middle of the track.
Or one of his, like from Yes, it was one of those things. But that's the most spiritual song on the album. I'm not a spiritual person, but that is the most spiritual song on the album. And it is directly about my wife. And I wanted it to be personal. I wanted it to be last because I wanted to end on a positive note, because I'd already sort of felt like I'd bookended the album with In Solo and The Haunted, which was about the same two characters and was a little bit depressing at the end, but because it's a kind of about this, their estrangement. And then to end on a more positive note. And this is the bizarre thing. I wrote my death into that song. And if you listen to the last verse, it's about me leaving and her being there when I go. And I'm hoping that's the way that it'll be, the order of things.
That's
and
deep.
It is deep. And if you listen to it, you'll hear it, but it's done in a really positive way. And it's about the sort of light that we leave behind, maybe because of love. And I just, there's only, in putting the order of the album together, this was the only place it could be, because you couldn't follow that. I'm dead.
You talk about that band dynamic. I mean, you guys have had a career that's been on and off for 4 or 5 decades. Are you surprised in what you've experienced? Are you surprised that the Beatles even lasted 10 years?
Are we on to the Beatles now? Are we truly doing the Beatles now?
Well, I'm transitioning.
You're transitioning. Well,
the green light is on. You can talk the Beatles now, man. Just go crazy.
We go back and forth.
Sorry, what was the question there? Tell me, Doug.
I just want. Were you even surprised with all that alpha male testosterone and that they've lasted as long as they did?
Well, they, really their career was short, wasn't it? I mean,
right. But I mean, knowing the band dynamic and how everyone was
how
right.
surprised how long they lasted. Yeah, I think I think with the Beatles, they really did what most bands do in 20 years. They did in that span of 7, of recorded work. What they would do. People forget the Beatles were an avant-garde band. They were pushing the boundaries into art rock everywhere. Now, I mean, I was mentioning 10cc earlier. Track like I'm Mandy or Art for Art's Sake. These were songs that. I was trying to emulate some of them on my album here, but they're nothing compared to what some of the stuff, the Beatles would be doing in towards the end of their career. I mean, the famous medley on the back of Abbey Road, to jump around like that. This is a band that could have stayed in like a lot of their contemporaries, in a completely commercial world, doing that sort of rock and roll stuff that they did on the first few albums. But they, even because that made them so huge, but then they turned around and went, well, we're just going to do the most difficult record you've ever, here and there you've ever heard. We're going to give you stuff that will expand your mind. Now, I just think that compression of artistic change and development compressed so tightly around 2 really strong egos. There wasn't just, it's like with U2 have been around forever. There's obviously just one guy who's in charge, right? The Rolling Stones, even. There's one guy who's in charge, so this was 2 guys in charge. And then a third came along writing some of the most incredible music to come. So, not being suppressed by the brilliance of John and Paul, George delivers, something and here comes a
phenomenon, isn't it? He was sort of bottled up, like trying to compete with these guys. And it's amazing that Phil Spector inherited all of that George Harrison solo work straight after the Beatles disbanded, because he'd been shelving all these songs because, John and Paul sort of carved up the empire between them both.
Well, I think they learned off each other a lot. So I have to put my hands up and say that I'm a Paul guy, right?
Okay, yeah.
Not a Pool guy, a Paul guy, right? So I'm in his camp a lot because I think his writing is unfiltered. He has. And sometimes that's why Paul has delivered some terrible stuff as a solo artist, because he doesn't.
He's experimental in his solo work, isn't he? Like a Temporary Secretary. I mean, that's some really sort of groundbreaking solo material from Paul.
Yeah, and the thing is with Paul, when he writes something, it's not like he says there's the voice of John talking to him, but the truth is he pretty much puts out everything he writes. Because he's kind of that's anyway. Let's go back to the Beatles. So I think Paul had the chops songwriting wise. He had his dad inspiring him. He had, he wrote When I'm 64 when he was 16 or something, didn't he? So he had the vaudeville chord sequences, these Eastern European chord sequences that had come over to America and created musical theater. He had all of that pretty much down. And if you look at John's work was much more 4 chords, the earthy, 4 classic,
really sort of, earthy sort of, sort of very sort of organic. John,
he was
more sort of Renaissance man, kind of like yourself. You play a lot of instruments, and Paul played a lot of different instruments. Maybe that's why you identify with Paul.
Well, what I can see going on here, and I think it's really beautiful, really, is, Paul was the arty one. He was going out with Jane Asher. They were hanging out at the Indica Gallery. He's the artistic guy. John is the sort of slightly angry working class guy, but not getting that kind of being angry with Paul probably for doing all these arty things. We're not middle class,
married
man.
And stuck at home.
phenomenal. And then you see John trying to reach for him. The minute they come together musically, and I can hear lots of Paul's chords going over into John's work, is with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, right? That's when they are totally on par with each other. That's nose to nose, mano a mano, double A side record, right? So, and then John decides he's the arty guy. I'm gonna get this artist, and I'm gonna hang out with her, and I'm gonna have her in the studio, and I'm gonna be at the one at the galleries. So it was like this role reversal had gone on, which was all about their internal competition, and more that a slight sort of envy and aspiration. You know, I think you know, the Beatles wouldn't have existed without any of them, but I think John was reaching up to be Paul all the way through their career, and in the end, he felt he didn't need him.
It's insightful. Wow, Gary.
Sorry, you got me started, guys.
No. You know, I have another question for you. As a songwriter, do you ever rely on the Beatles to put you in that songwriting mindset?
Oh, I think there's always they're part of the sort of potpourri of everything that I've collected in my eclectic record collection and life. I'm always blown away by their skills, and most of all by and Paul in particular, by his enthusiasm to keep working, to keep going, to keep making music, to keep asking the questions of the art form that he's in. And occasionally when I'm having my dry spots, as it were, you know, and blocks, you just think, what would Paul do? Paul would just get to the piano and smash at it. You know, he'd come up with something. So he's that's an incredible inspiration. I think he's written one of the most perfect songs ever written, which is Yesterday. And he still doesn't know how he wrote it. He still thinks he dreamt it and maybe stole it, right?
Yeah, it's the most covered song of all time, apparently.
It's a perfect AABA song. It begins with the title. You know, it's the reason he thought he may have heard it somewhere else is because it's very, very like a Noel Coward sort of song. It's how they wrote songs in those early days, and of vaudeville and music hall. It's so complete and succinct, and I think it's one of those genre jumping songs that any age group can fall in love and get something from. And so for me, I'm forever trying to write that song. You know,
sort of try to reach back. Like Paul was very into reaching back into the past to bring something out into the present day, but you know, form it something new. But he was very good at sort of drawing out the past into his current day. Are you sort of like that yourself in a way? Is that what you mean when you say I'm trying to sort of do that?
I think Paul was inspired by the sort of they come in a time when there was a lot of Edwardian nostalgia, right? I hear it and I see it in their work. There was a lot of, you know, if you take something like The Benefit of Mr. Kite, you know, there was a lot of fashion at the time. If you walk down King's Road, you would have seen there was an Edwardian revival going on, but the whimsy of English culture, slightly fantasized and fabricated, that the Beatles put into their music. So there's humor as well from their past. They weren't just a band that was inspired by American rock and roll or the Everly Brothers or whatever. They were inspired by the Goons. Now, unless you know the work of the Goons, you don't fully appreciate the Beatles. That's why the goofing around thing was really big for them. So I think, you know, the elements of stuff from the past and bringing it up to date and filtering it into their work, they were unashamedly doing that the whole time. And it was very, very British, a lot of that. We
could talk about this all day. Unfortunately, we have to cut the interview short. But Gary, appreciate your time today. Don't forget your solo album, In Solo, available wherever albums are sold.
Don't get me started on the Beatles again, guys, because I just won't stop.